Hi, I'm Thomas Mohbat, and this is Recording Studio Workshop. I'm going to give you 10 different ways that you can help prepare for your upcoming recording session, as well as save a lot of big money and time in the studio as a band. I see a lot of bands come into the studio and they're very enthusiastic and ready to go, but there's often things that they overlook that could save them significant time and money in the studio. Number one, pre-production. It's a really easy thing to do. Before you go to the studio, have a pre-production meeting as a band and maybe with the engineer from the recording studio if he or she is available to come by for a few hours and sit in at your rehearsal space, listen to the songs, maybe make suggestions about how to approach your recording studio session. That would be a really good time to go over structure and arrangements of songs, establish the tempo of songs, go over parts, how long are the solos. It's important to do these things before you go to the recording studio so you're not spending time there trying to figure out these details. It's also a really good time to decide which songs are you going to record. If you get to the studio and you're still unsure of what songs you're going to use, you're going to waste time there, especially if you tried to record a song, it's not going well and you decide to ditch it. You've just spent hours trying to record something that is not even going to be used. So decide those well ahead of time in the rehearsal area. It might be a good idea to offer to pay the producer or the engineer who's spending time out of his or her day to come in and sit in with you. You might pay them for a few hours of their time and maybe offer a meal or some beverages when they get there. So it's laid back, fun, and they're making some extra money. It's also going to give the engineer a good heads up on what to expect from you and from the band when it comes to recording day. He knows the nature of the songs. I've heard the songs a few times. He's familiar with the personalities of the band. You've established a little bit of a bond there well ahead of the recording session. So when the recording day comes, you're all friends already. There's no awkwardness when you walk into the studio. Number two, check your equipment. There's nothing worse as an engineer than when I'm setting up drums and amps to find out that there's a piece of faulty or squeaky equipment. Drum kits are frequently the problem here. Squeaky pedals might need to be lubricated or even changed out entirely. Drum heads, if they're really old, the drummer should change those. Buy new heads for the kit ahead of time, especially on the snare and tom-toms. So often the snare head's been changed out, but the bottom head has a hole in it, or the snares are not adjusted properly, or they're buzzing too much, or the tom-toms might be old and worn out with dimples and abrasions. So take the time as a drummer to invest in your piece of equipment and put on new heads. Don't forget to check the kick drum head. If that's okay, then you don't need to replace that expensive head. But if it's got a lot of signs of wear and it's really old, it's going to make a big difference on your recording session if you've got a good, solid, punchy kick drum. So don't neglect that beast. Don't forget to check your amps. Make sure you don't have a bad tube or a loose connection. Is there a buzz in the amp that's going to give you a problem? Check those things ahead of time. Make sure to tune up your guitars. Make sure the guitars have a reasonably new strings, or if you put new strings on there, have given a chance to break them in and let them acclimate to the guitar a little bit. Especially on acoustic guitars, acoustic instruments, really double check those to make sure that those are all squeak-free and sounding good. You might need to add some kind of a rosin or a fret ease on your strings to keep squeaks down. Don't forget to check your percussion. Make sure all your percussion's in good order. Conga heads are new and not old and worn out. And another often overlooked problem in the studio is the simple guitar cable. Make sure you're using a good quality cable that's not shorted out or has some kind of wear and tear on it. It might be a good time to go ahead and invest in a brand new guitar cable for your axe. Number three, work out your parts ahead of time. When you get to the studio, it's not a good time to try to figure out your solo. You should have figured that well ahead of time on each of the songs that has a solo in it. It's awful for an engineer to have to sit through take after take after take of you trying to work out the perfect guitar solo. It wears on the engineer, it wears on the band, it takes up valuable time. It's no fun for anybody, and especially the guitar player. You might get frustrated at your inability to get that part nailed. Even when you've almost got it, it's not quite there, but the band's looking at you, so you feel like you have to compromise yourself. Figure out those parts ahead of time. That way you're in the studio, you're just going for the best take of that solo, not trying to figure out the solo. You've got 2 or 3 solos to choose from, and then you can choose the very best one you like, or perhaps comp edit a solo out of that. The same goes for background vocals. Often so much time is spent on the recording of the band and then the lead vocal, but the background vocals are almost considered an afterthought. Work out those background harmonies ahead of time so you're not trying to make them up in the studio as you go along. If the band can do it, that's great. If the band doesn't sing that well, maybe the lead singer or singers can overdub his or her parts as background vocals. He or she can go in and layer and multi-track their own background vocals. If that's not possible, it might be a good time to get some friends or even some professionals to come in and nail those background parts for you. 2 or 3 people in the studio on the microphones doing background vocals can really add a big dimension to your final songs. It might be worth the extra session or half session required to do that. Money well spent. Especially if the band's sounding like a group of gorillas in a gymnasium. Number 4, working with your MIDI template. A lot of studio sessions are based around the click or the MIDI template, the musical instrument digital interface template that's going to be used as your guide track for recording the song into your DAW. So it's good if you can get that taken care of ahead of time instead of having the engineer do that in the studio. That is to say, if you've got something more than a basic 4/4 click count off where you can just tell the engineer what the BPM, he can type that in and then you play to that, that's one thing. But if you've got any kind of a more complicated structure to your song, any tempo changes, things like that, go ahead and take the time to program those at home and then send the engineer the MIDI file ahead of time so that he can pre-upload that into his DAW and be ready for you guys. You'll have the song ready with the MIDI file already established, so you're not wasting time in the studio to do that. You might have to pay the engineer for the time that he's going to take to load that into his computer, but it's going to be a lot less time for him to do those on a number of songs instead of sitting there, and you might spend a whole day just programming MIDI files for your album. It's important to get a good count off on your songs too, so don't forget to leave at least 1 or maybe 2 bars or more of a good count off at the beginning of the song, maybe 1 or 2 bars for the drummer to get started, and then another bar or 2 for him to do some actual stick clicks for the band, and that'll kick off the song then. If you'd like, if you've taken some time in pre-production and have a scratch mix established, you can go ahead and send that to the engineer as well, and give him a chance to listen to it ahead of time and understand what kind of project he's getting into. Especially if you got a bunch of songs, maybe send him the whole thing a few weeks ahead of time and let him kind of get it into his DNA. So he's familiar with the band. Even if he hasn't had a chance to come out and sit in with you, he can kind of listen to the song, get him familiar with the project, and make for a lot better recording experience. Don't expect the engineer to know the songs inside and out. He's probably just going to listen to it once or maybe twice, in his busy day. But even that's going to be better than coming in blind. If he's got a second just to familiarize himself with the project, that's going to be a really good thing for your recording session. Number 5, booking your studio time in blocks of time rather than by the hour. When you're doing a whole band, you can pretty much expect to spend at least a whole day, maybe 2 or 3 days, tracking just the rhythm section of your group. And so instead of booking it by the hour, go ahead and ask the studio you're working in if they can give you a discount if you book a whole day, typically 8 or 10-hour days. You're going to get a block rate on the whole day, which might save you significantly off the hourly. It's a long day, but sometimes even if you don't use the entire day, you end up saving money. Don't forget to give yourself some time for a break or 2 in there for lunch, and just give the engineer a break as well. You can also ask the engineer if they're going to charge you for the setup time. That is, are they starting the studio clock the minute you walk in the door, right on the hour, or are they going to give you a little bit of time to set up your instruments and amps? That's what I usually do in the studio that I work in. I let the band come in, bring their equipment in, set up where they want, get comfortable. I'm not working yet. I've just opened the door and I'm just talking to them a little bit. Don't let them take all day, but you might give them a half an hour, maybe an hour to set up their gear before you even start putting up microphones or headphones or anything like that. Yeah, so do try to book blocks of time, especially when you're just getting started as a rhythm section. Later on, if you're going in for overdubs, vocals, leads, and you just need an hour or two or three, it might be more appropriate just to book an hour or two at a time. You don't need an 8-hour block for that. But you know, think about giving yourself a few days to record your rhythm section, another day or two to do your vocals, maybe another day to do percussion, overdubs, things like that. So you might be looking at 4 or 5, even a week's worth of time. The studio is going to be really happy if you can know that they booked an entire week of time and on their calendar. They're probably going to give you a pretty good discount if you're booking a week solid. Number 6, working with click tracks. When you're working in the recording studio, frequently you're going to be recording with a click track or a metronome count in your headphones from a computer. So even though you might have established the BPM, the tempo of the song ahead of time and sent that to your engineer, just make sure you're comfortable with working with that tempo. That is, when you're rehearsing, make sure that the whole band can hear the click, especially the drummer. Make sure that everybody can hear the click really well and dial in the exact tempo that you're going to be working on. Adjust a little bit faster or slower if need be, but get really used to working with that click track in the background so that when you're in the studio, it doesn't throw you off. I can't tell you how many times that I've seen drummers get frustrated because they can't follow the click, and it puts the whole band in kind of a bad mood. It gets things off on really the wrong foot. So if that drummer is comfortable with that click and has been working with it for a while, it's going to get things going off in the right direction. It's just an afterthought. It's something that everybody's kind of used to already, and not something that's restricting the progress of the session. And make sure you've dialed in that exact BPM. If you need to adjust it a little bit in the studio, that's fine, but it's a really good idea to have the tempo established well ahead of the recording day. Number 7, shooting video. It's not really a way to save money in the recording studio, but I've seen so many bands come in and spend all this time and money to record audio of their recording session, but nobody bothers to bring a quality camera and videotape the session. Everybody will whip out a iPhone to make some low quality video, jittery and not well lit. But if you can plan just a little bit ahead of time to have a videographer or at least a friend or two with a good quality camera recording the event all day long. That is, their job is just to document the entire day. You can use that footage later on to sync up with your final mix and make a really good quality video. You can use these videos on YouTube, on your web page, Facebook, social media. It's a great thing to have, and it's something you can't do later unless you want to go back and book more studio time. So while you're there, make sure you get some good quality video images. Hopefully keep that camera rolling the whole day. You know, if you have to pay a friend or even hire a professional to work for a long session, so be it. Then you've got great video and great audio that you can use, and you don't have to pay extra for later when you're shooting a video. Or if you're making a professional video, you can use those behind the scenes shots of the singer on the microphone, or the drummer in slow motion, or the bass player, guitar player shredding a good lick. If you can get more than one camera, that's even better. 2 or 3 camera shoots in the studio are a fantastic thing to edit to later. You can have a camera on the drummer, you can have one in the vocal booth, you can have one on the lead guitar player or the rhythm section, and then edit these later in post. If that's not an option, you can also set up 2 or 3 GoPros on tripods and at least get that kind of footage of the group. But it's always better to have a cameraman holding or using a tripod to get those images. It might even be worth the money to go ahead and hire a professional videographer or even a small crew to come in there with a couple, 2 or 3 cameras. That way they can shoot the drummer at the same time that they're recording the singer, as well as the engineer and the guys in the control room. You've got 2 or 3 cameras to edit from later on when you're doing your final video. It's an additional expense, but it's going to save you a lot of time later on. And again, remember, there's no going back and getting that footage again. It's really nice to have it the day that you're in the studio. So at least try to have one camera recording the whole thing. Number 8, don't try to record everybody live. It's something that I see bands do a lot in the studio. They want to set up everybody just like they do at rehearsal and try to record 4 or 5 or 6 musicians and a vocal all at the same time. It's an interesting exercise, but it's very challenging on the engineer, and it forces the engineer to focus his attention on several different things at once. instead of just the rhythm section, which is really the most important thing in that first session, is to get your drums, your bass, rhythm guitars, or possibly your keyboard. Don't try to add second and third and fourth parts just yet. Don't try to do congas and violins and all that right now. It's better to focus on just the rhythm section, and don't ask the engineer to try to get, a zillion different microphones going and several different headphone mixes all at the same time. I understand the enthusiasm, the desire to record that way, but if you're going to do that, maybe have a sound truck or a live sound guy come out and record a live event. That's more appropriate, where you've got an audience involved and things like that. But when you're in the studio, really the first and most important thing you get and establish is your drums. And if you can record the bass at the same time with that, that's great. That way you can really focus on a few different takes and figure out which is the best take for you guys to build the rest of your song on. It's so important and critical at that point to choose the very most solid one as your foundation before you start building up the rest of the tracks, because once you've got that established, you can't go and undo that very easily. So again, focus on the rhythm section exclusively, and then come back and do your overdubs separately. Again, you'll be able to focus a lot more attention on each of those overdubs when you're focusing on just one thing at a time. You can really put things under the microscope that way. Plus, in smaller studios, having 5 or 6 people, a sound guy, an assistant, maybe a videographer, and maybe a few girlfriends or boyfriends, it's going to get crowded in that studio, and it's going to be a lot for the engineer to try to keep focused when he's got that many people that he's babysitting. So, maybe leave the entourage at home and just bring in just the people that are recording on that day. It might just be the drummer and the bass player. That is fine. Don't feel like you've got to get everything done on that first day, because it's not realistic. Don't spread your energy and thoughts across too many different areas. Focus on just the rhythm section and make sure that those tempos and those grooves are really happening as a foundation before you start building up your house around that. If they're not, keep on doing it. Two or 3 or 4 or 5 takes from the rhythm section is typical. Really listen back carefully, focus on the drums, make sure they're rock solid before you move on. Then later on, you're going to come in and do your overdubs, vocals, additional guitar parts, horns, percussion, background vocals. Those are going to be overdubbed later. One thing that I will do though is give the singer a scratch vocal microphone that he or she can hand hold in the studio, maybe even walk around and just kind of do a guide track of vocal for the band to follow instead of just trying to do an instrumental version. He can talk to the band, keep the band morale up, keep things going that more like a rehearsal that way. But you're not even going to use that final vocal. It's got all kinds of other instruments and bleed in there. It's probably not going to be a final vocal at all, but it really helps the band go in the right direction and keep things flowing. Number 9, drugs and alcohol. This can be a real problem area for bands, especially if they're used to having a few beers at their rehearsals. When they come into the studio, it's probably a good idea not to bring alcohol to the recording session. It's going to be a very long work day. You don't want to start off buzzed and keep that buzz going all day long. You want to keep sober and focused and keep your energy up, and alcohol and drugs are probably just going to diminish that. After all, this is time to work, not time to party. If you are going to have a little bit of alcohol for the session, be discreet and keep it in moderation. If you need to pass around a brown jug before the session, everybody has a swig. I've been in sessions where that will help the session a little bit. It loosens up the tongues, it gets a good vibe going, but then put it away and don't keep on hitting that liquor all day long. It's just going to wear you out. Also, tempers can flare when you do that. I've seen a lot of bands getting drunken arguments over silly stuff because they've had too much alcohol. For those of you that like to smoke, make sure that you step outside and do it discreetly in an area that's not going to be obtrusive to the engineer. Don't smoke in the studio. It's not good for the equipment, and the engineer is probably not going to be too cool with it either. Number 10, don't tag team the engineer. He's going to be there all day with your band, taking requests from all of you as individuals as well as collectively as a band. Don't feel like you've got to use every single minute of your engineer's time. Give him a chance to use the restroom, maybe clear his head for a second, step outside and get a breath of air, smoke a cigarette, whatever he needs to do just to kind of gain and keeps perspective on the session. He's your critical pair of ears, and if he's burnt out or tired or feeling frustrated, he's not going to be at his best. So Give him a break, especially when you're overdubbing. There's nothing worse as an engineer than I've been working on, say, a guitar player for an hour and a half, and his part is done, and then the bass player's right there ready to do his overdubs, and then right after that the percussion and so on. And it's like being tag teamed. So don't do that to your engineer. Keep him as a friendly member of the band, and you'll get a lot better results out of him if he's fresh and comfortable with the session. Don't sweat the clock so much. Don't point out how much it's costing you per minute or anything like that. Think of the whole day as what you're paying for, not by the hour. Even if you are, don't try to break it down into how much is this costing per minute or per hour. Just think of the whole day and how much you're going to get done that day as the outcome. Maybe you got fewer songs done, but you got some really good quality out of it. That's really what's important in the long run, not whether you rush through 7 songs in 4 hours. You know, that's not what you're trying to do here. The other side of that coin is if your engineer is feeling overburdened, he might actually start resenting you a little bit for doing that to him or her. So keep that in mind. You want to keep him in your friendly camp. You don't want him to be secretly wishing that you guys would just leave. He's got a job to do. He's there to be paid and to do his work. Don't make him feel like he's got to be, you know, on every single minute. Also remember that at the end of your day, it doesn't necessarily mean that the engineer is done with his or her activities. You might be packing up your gear and having a cold one, but the engineer has still got to back up your files successfully and safely. He or she might have to make you some rough mixes to take home with you, possibly even upload those files to a cloud or to a drive for you to listen to at home. So just because you're done working, don't think that the studio clock has stopped ticking or that the engineer is done with his day. Don't start asking him about how much do we owe you when he's still working. Let him finish his tasks, and when he's done, then you'll see, oh, he's done, now we're done. How much do we owe you now? Don't ask the engineer to become an accountant when he's still functioning as a creative production type. Typically, you're not going to be charged after that. He's not going to charge you when he's done with his work. He's got other stuff to do after you've left, like winding cables, putting away microphones, basically shutting down the studio for the day, or perhaps getting ready for the next session, but he's not going to charge you for those things. That wouldn't be appropriate. Okay, I'm going to give you a bonus. This is number 11, transportation. Make sure that you've got good quality transportation to and from the recording session. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a band running late or a member of the band show up late because their transportation broke down or their ride didn't show up or they couldn't get a taxi or an Uber in their neighborhood. You don't want to call the studio and say, hey, we can't make it on time because so-and-so is running late. That's not going to fly with the studio. You book time starting at a certain time. They expect you to arrive at that time, and they should start getting paid just about the time that you arrive there. It's particularly important when you've got critical band members coming in, like drummers and bass players early on. The session can't start without them, so make sure you're not waiting for them. It's a good idea for the band to maybe meet ahead of time at a restaurant. That way you can make sure everybody's on time before the recording session. You can have a good meal, have some coffee, and talk about the upcoming day and get the band psyched about the project, and then arrive as a caravan to the recording studio on time or maybe a few minutes ahead of time. Don't make the mistake of showing up too early though. Nothing worse than a band showing up half an hour or an hour before they're supposed to be there. The staff and engineer aren't ready for you yet. They might even have another session going already, or they're just getting things opened up. They don't want to be dealing with you yet. They want you to arrive right on time or maybe 5 or 10 minutes ahead of time. If you are running late, make sure you call and say, hey, we're just down the block, or we had to pull over or something like that. But ideally, you don't want to be giving any excuses to the studio. You want to just arrive on time. So arrive as a caravan, arrive as an entourage, and everybody loads in together. It's a really good way to get things rolling. Don't let one guy's transportation problems mess up your recording session. And I'll give you an extra bonus number 12. Don't try to record too many songs. I know I've said this a little bit before, but it's really critical that you don't try to come in and get all your songs done on one day. It's kind of a mark of a new band that wants to do this. Typically what you want to do is have a game plan in mind for how many songs and how many tracks you'd like to get done per day, just as a guideline though. But don't get upset with yourself or with your bandmates or certainly the engineer because things are taking longer than you thought. That just goes with the territory. The recording process is long and slow sometimes, and you'll often hit a bottleneck or a problem that you didn't see coming. If it takes you extra time to get over that problem, that's what you're there to do. It's hard work. Make sure you've given yourself enough time to get things done and focus on the overall quality of the project and not on the amount of tracks you got or how many songs you got done that day. Remember, the final listener, the fan, doesn't care about how many songs they're getting. They're more focusing on the quality of one song or a group of songs and the impact that it has on them emotionally and spiritually. Does the song ring true with them? Does that evoke emotion or make them want to dance and jump around? So don't try to focus on too many songs. Focus on each single and the quality of that song before you move on to another one. I hope these tips have been useful for you and they help you get the most out of your upcoming recording studio session. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to see more, please consider joining my recording studio forum. It's full of tips and tricks, as well as my personal advice on how to improve your studio and keep your clients happy and productive. And if you'd like to get in on my producer's Talk Story hotline, you can sign up today for absolutely free. I'm offering it all to you right now at a special early bird discount. Mahalo for your kind support, and aloha from Hawaii.